As you can imagine, Jason is moving like a banshee on the streets of Poland. And we spoke to him about 10 minutes ago and he's like, wait, I have to concentrate. I got to find my hotel. So we're really happy he made it. And my name's Laura Freeman. I'm the Director of Marketing for Jewish Federation. And again, I want to welcome everybody here. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jason. And how you doing, Jason? You okay?
Yes, it's all good. Good evening, or live from Warsaw. It's day 3. So it's nice to see so many familiar faces.
Jason, for the press, you want to just
yeah,
say
I
your
was
name?
going to do it. I'll do it. Just as a reminder, my name is Jason Shames, S-H-A-M-E-S, and I'm the CEO of the Jewish Federation of Northern New Jersey. I am here in Warsaw on a humanitarian mission to advocate and assist refugees fleeing the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, including its impact, and for fulfilling Federation's mission to take care of Jews in need no matter where they are. So I am delighted to be able to report tonight. I have a bit more news from my last update, which was day 1, remarkably only 48 hours ago. So since then, I've had the opportunity to actually go to the border itself and have a little bit of work with refugee hotels in different places. So I think what I would do is sum up this trip, or at least begin my remarks.
Jason, the sound went out. Give us 1 second to figure it out. All right, Jason,
You were just muted, that's all.
Yeah, Jason, unmute. You should be good.
So I'm not sure. I had like this great oratory thing going, and now my mojo has been curtailed. So where did I leave off? Does anyone want to? No one. No one. Bueller. All right, I'll just go back.
Sorry.
I will say how honored and privileged I feel to be here and to witness, bear witness to history. It's a term we've used a lot the past 3 days, not so much because of the Holocaust per se, but because of what's going on in the refugee status and where we are. So I was talking about the fact that I am here representing Federation on a humanitarian mission to assist refugees who are fleeing the conflict in Ukraine, which is really the Russian war in Ukraine. And yesterday I was fortunate enough to start my day by going to a refugee hotel in the historic city of Lublin. The hotel that we were in was actually the yeshiva in Lublin that began the Daf Yomi program. So you're going back now to a very historic place in Jewish hearts. And before the war, the building itself is still owned by the Jewish community. It's now a hotel, and the American Joint Distribution Committee, the JDC, one of our significant partners in this endeavor, whose main responsibility is social welfare or rescue, renewal, and relief with regard to these refugees and cities in the Ukraine, is hosting upward of 60 people on any given night, 60 refugees. And we had the opportunity to hear the stories from 7 of them, and I'll talk about that in a minute. After that, we spent several hours at the border at a town called Medica, which is the largest crossing from you refugees coming from Ukraine, where I actually got to witness and see families, and it's mostly women and children, which I can also talk about in a few minutes, coming right into Poland and seeing the amount of humanitarian assistance and the infrastructure that's been set up to help assist them in their next phases in life. And then today, once again, at an Aliyah hotel to meet with more families and refugees and to really see the process of what it takes to make Aliyah. The JCC in Warsaw to hear about the work of Hillel on college campuses, and then a private meeting with the chief rabbi to talk about what some of the needs are, which I'm happy to talk about as well. So once again, I would say before opening it up for questions, the compelling part of this are some of the amazing stories of human survival as we continue to balance the horrors of humanity, there are glimmers of sort of hope and positivity that come out of being here. I mean, the irony that Jews are coming to Poland for safety is something that probably many of us would have shook our heads at many, many moons ago. So seeing that sea change for now is something rather remarkable. The stories, again, are compelling. So the major one that stuck with me in Lublin yesterday was we met with 7 people at the hotel, 7 refugees. 5 were willing to speak. 2 broke down in tears before they were even able to start their stories. And of the 5, only 1 was really able to get through his story. But I would share with you that the touching one was a woman and her 15-year-old daughter, who not only cried when she spoke, but was continuously in tears throughout her remarks. And so the story is that she's a single mother with a 15-year-old daughter in Kiev, in the middle of Kiev. And their building and their home remained intact, but everything around them had been hit. And they had spent a couple of nights hearing bombs going off and living in fear. Obviously, work and employment and school had stopped. And so 2 of them were huddled up together now in one bed out of fear. The city, the mayor, had sent out a notice to everyone telling them to seek shelter immediately. So they must have gone to over a dozen different public shelters in the city. And believe it or not, every single one of them was locked. So as they explained it, the reason why they were unable to get into these shelters is because the owners of these, quote, public shelters had been renting them out to private businesses as secondary sources of income. And when the conflict started, they were locked off. And in fact, the way they got into the shelters was a bunch of them broke the lock on one of them and got in. So now you think in the part of the story, you're going to hear about safety and the other things that come with it. Except unfortunately, there was neither electricity nor plumbing nor any water whatsoever, nor food in the shelter. And the woman proceeded to tell the story that for 8 nights in a row, they wound up staying in this place because of the constant bombardment in the neighborhood, to the point where they were using jars when they had to go to the bathroom. And they would only come up for food during daylight hours. And at that point, after night number 8, she explained that she had a little bit, she used the word trauma and a breakdown. Well, she used trauma. I don't know if the Russian word was breakdown. And she and her daughter then spent the next 3 nights on the road just getting to Poland, right? So here they are now, they get to Poland, they get through, they get the humanitarian guidance, they get the transit to this hotel in Lublin. And Lublin is a good 3-hour bus ride from the border and a 2.5-hour or so bus ride from Warsaw. If you could just picture it sort of in sequence, even though it's not quite a lateral sequence. And she is trying to get her life back together. And this is where I would say, for those of you who have made your commitment to the Ukraine campaign, your dollars are really making a difference, because for 3 nights in a row now, they've had food, they have slept safely, they're in a decent enough hotel, 3 stars by our standard. They're getting counseling and they're getting guidance on what to do next, even though they don't have a plan. So this is not a family that's necessarily going to make or not make Aliyah. This is a family in total shock and trauma, trying to understand what there is next. And there's no husband or father, like so many others, that's staying back for the war effort, because men between ages, or abled men between 18 and 60, are not coming out. So these are just some of the horrific human stories that we're hearing, with a positive note about how humanity on the other side is trying to step up and do their part. And I think that the border scene was almost surreal yesterday. I used a word in a TV interview yesterday, shook me to the core. It shook me to the core because it was nothing I would ever have expected to see before in my life. To see families with kids walking through literally like this green gate that separates these 2 countries, and to see a lineup of international volunteers handing toys and candy to kids, volunteer workers trying to help provide food and assistance. Now, mind you, there are tents set up. It looks like a shanty town in terms of tents, but these tents are all volunteers lined up one by one to welcome and direct refugees. So at one tent actually was for rescue pets. none of us would think about it. We heard a story this morning from a girl who had a nervous breakdown because they left their cat back in Kiev, but other people have managed to bring their pets. Pets still need food and toys, leashes, and other things. There's a volunteer tent for pets. But more remarkably is to see things like a Sikh soup kitchen and food truck backed up by the Mexican Jewish community right next to the Egyptian Red Crescent, each one offering total assistance to people crossing the border. From there, the Polish government has provided government and transportation to take people to transit spots. In this case, in a town about 2 miles away, there's a Tedesco, an old Tedesco, which is a English supermarket chain that had been out of business, that had been converted into a processing center. Within that is a Jewish hospital organization called Natan. It's Israeli. Our federation actually contributed a small amount last year to support them. For those of you who know Alan Silverstein, I'll give him a shout out. He's very involved in Natan and introduced us to Natan. There's what they would call a field hospital in that center to help process people immediately. And so those are the types of stories, and I can go on and on about the things that I heard today, but I think I've heard myself talk enough, and I would gladly open up for any specific questions. I'm happy to share stories. I'm happy to talk about, again, my personal historical connection to Warsaw and what it was like. We did not do many Holocaust or Shoah stops today. We did very quickly go to where the Jewish ghetto was. So we did do a quick pit stop at Mila 18, and then we walked to the train stop, I can't pronounce it, so I apologize. And I would say that, that's always a tough one because I am named for my great-grandfather, who was taken there in 1942, I believe, and taken to Treblinka and gassed only 2-3 hours later. So every time I go to that particular train stop, it's a little gut-wrenching. But I'm happy to take those questions. I think question number one, is from our president, Lee Lasher, who's asked me what has surprised me the most so far on this trip. There's so many, I don't even know where to start, Lee. It's overwhelming. I would say the international humanitarian effort at the border and at the train station has absolutely blown me away. There's a video circulating that my colleague in Montreal sent to me this morning at the train station, where an American, a non-Jewish American from Virginia, flew here to help ease the pain and suffering of kids when they came off the trains and arrived in Ukraine. So he was dressed in a full Batman suit and was playing Batman, going up to kids, pretending to be the real Batman just to get these kids to smile. So much so that he convinced another woman at the train station to dress, I think, as Wonder Woman and to do it together. And it's amazing to me that people would come this far and wide to do things like that. And I think the fact that there's so many different faiths and organizations working together to assure that each refugee who comes across doesn't walk into an abyss is been more than remarkable for me and an eye-opener in terms of shocking. There are so many different pieces. I'm beyond impressed with the way our two partners in the field, the Jewish Agency for Israel and the JDC, have managed to maneuver all of their operations from the Ukraine to Warsaw so quickly and to adapt to processing Aliyah or to feeding people or to provide healthcare. So I'm really, I'm shocked by the more of the positive side of what's been going on, Lee.
Jason, let me help you out. Let me help you out with the questions. How about somebody asked if you've heard about whether or not some of the refugees want to come to the United States. And if they do, is there a need for those of us that are here to open up our homes to take them in?
So that second part of your question is really up to the American government and how many refugees are going to be allowed in. But I'll tell you, every single refugee that we've spoken to fits sort of into a couple of different buckets. Bucket one is, I'm Jewish and I'm going to Israel, whether I have a family member there or not, that's where I want to go. There's the majority who are shell-shocked, like absolutely shell-shocked and still traumatized and have no idea what they're going to do next. And then there's the bucket that has other family or friends in Europe that they're trying to get to. And then the last bucket are those who are holding out hope that they could go home one day. So I have not heard a lot of the I'm coming to the United States, to be honest, yet. And I think Biden's coming here in the next day or two, and I know that there are lobbying efforts to change sort of the numbers of people who would be allowed in. But as far as I know, there's not been a mass effort yet for people to come into the country, our country, nor has there been, quite frankly, one person of the hundreds of people that we've met who have said, I want to come to the United States.
Jason, maybe you can talk a little bit about our federation's relationship with Lviv. And one of the questions did come in, I think, from someone who's traveled to Lviv about whether or not you heard anything about the people that we have connections with, in particular, Anna Bondar.
So I have not, Karen, I've not asked about Anna yet. We were only about 100 or so miles from Lviv because it's so close to the border. The tour guide constantly was calling, at the Galicia, for those of you who know that term in that area. So as the Russians invaded going east to west, the entire eastern part of Ukraine shifted. It's sort of shifted from being in the Kharkov, Kiev sort of corridor to being based out of Lvov. So all of the institutions, all of the Jews, that became, and Lvov has become the inner Ukraine transit hub, for lack of a better term, to what's coming here into Poland right now. And to give you just a raw sense of the numbers, to talk about the influx within, is that there's supposedly 10 million displaced individuals from this war in Ukraine. 3.5 million have left the country, and 2.5 million of them have made their way to Poland, and the other million are mostly split between Romania and Hungary. So the reports that we're getting from Lviv is not so much that Lviv is under necessarily Russian attack, and it has gotten quieter in the last week. We've been told that the Russian onslaught has been at least stalled, and there are reports here that the Ukrainians have even won back some territory around Kiev and other places, but that Lviv is essentially being overrun from an administrative perspective by the volume of internal displaced people. So that's the report we're getting about Lviv right now. And a lot of people that we met with had made that pit stop in Lviv as the jumping point before coming here.
Jason, a lot of people may not know our relationship with Lviv. Could you just talk about that a little bit?
So we have a sister city relationship with Lviv. I don't know how it came to be, but I don't know if people were trying to make the new guy feel good some 12 years ago, but it was somehow it was known that my grandfather came from Lviv, and I had been there. And when we were talking about our federation's commitment to global Jewry and social welfare, the idea had come up with the JDC about twinning with a city in the former Soviet Union, with which we could fund the entire gap between what the claims conference was giving for Holocaust restitution to survivors still there and seniors, and what we were trying to do in that city in terms of the next generation, young leadership, things like camp and stuff like that. And so that bore into a process whereby we partnered or twinned with Lviv, Lvov, Lemberg, depending on how you want to call it. And so we have this unique, even more special bond with regard to funding and relationship with Lviv.
There are a few questions that have come in about what can we do? Do you think that there'll be a trip where other people can go over there? Is there a need or an ability for people who want to go over there for a week or two to volunteer? Do you see that as an opportunity?
So I think it depends. They're two different things. Doing what I did, I can't say that I volunteered. I mean, I didn't, we didn't have the time to even get our hands on the ground. I mean, there are times where we help carry or, feed people or things directly like that. But what I would say to you, if you have a specialty that's needed here, if you speak Russian, Polish, or Ukrainian, you're certainly more needed than someone like me who struggles even with the English language. So that's certainly a critical need. Medicine, medical is certainly a need, especially general practitioners and things like that, RNs that could really help out with some of the basic stuff. And if you really can speak Polish, Russian, or Ukrainian, the mental health needs here are absolutely enormous. Even when you meet with the physicians from Israel, from Beilinson, who are coming to assist in the Aliyah hotels, they will tell you that the medical things they're seeing are gastro-related, malnutrition, some maintenance things related to diabetes, cardio, even some cancer, but they consider that more maintenance. But the biggest issue that they're finding is the mental health and the trauma and the anxiety that people have. So I would say that's that end of the volunteering spectrum. To simply show up at the border to hand out candy to kids or dolls, I would say to you, there's not much there. The biggest request, I'm just gonna be honest, is financial. That's where they really need help. The chief rabbi today raised an excellent point. How the heck are we in Poland with no production going to provide a Seder and feed all of these people? He's estimating that's going to be $50 a person per Seder, and they're going to have 1,000 extra people. So start doing the math. And, we all know what matzah and stuff costs. So imagine the cost of feeding those people. So money is truly what's needed. I understand we're close to the 700,000 mark for our community in terms of what's going to be distributed, and it's probably not nearly enough, but that's what's needed. And the last part of that question, which is really separate, about doing what I did. So there is a toll to be paid for doing what I did today. And I'm very mindful of the fact that every single time we did a site visit, especially like when you think about doctors and they're spending a half an hour with us, is times that they're not spending with a patient. And the more trips that are coming like this, the more of a strain it's putting on a system that is already stressed to the hilt. And so I would ask for you to bear with me for a little bit. Let those on the ground who are doing work we could only envy and be so grateful for, let them get a little bit even on par with the game, if not ahead of the game. And then, yes, I would say to you, we could bring ourselves over here for 3 days and see everything.
Jason, a question came in about what is the distribution timeline on the monies that's been raised?
So as soon as we collect it, we're sending it up to JFNA, and JFNA is sending it out to JDC and Jaffe almost immediately. I forget the number. Maybe someone on staff can look it up, but I think JFNA has already distributed well over 10 million. I thought it was 12, but I'm sorry, Nancy, the exact number. I'm on 8 hours of sleep in 3 days is eluding me. I will say too, I will give credit to Rabbi Kirshner and Rabbi Pupko. There's a group here also of 9 people who came from northern New Jersey who brought about 162 or so duffel bags of supplies from northern New Jersey that are being distributed. Right now, those types of supplies, socks, hats, feminine hygiene products, if I'm using the right term now, toys, things like that, they're okay with. They're monitoring it. We visited a bunch of storage areas that showed all of the supplies and medicines that have been donated. So they're really looking for the cash because they are adding on staff. They're having to move people around, the hotels, all of that is costing money. The Tikva School, which is a large Jewish orphanage in Odessa, for example, with 360 to 390 kids on any given night, relocated to Romania a month ago, and with staff and with the support they're getting from the Romanian government and the EU, it's still costing them $32,000 a night to house and feed people. So we're really talking about the mathematical cost of hundreds of thousands of people being displaced.
Did you get a sense from any of the refugees about how they perceive the response from the world? Like, are they
Look, there's a little
aware?
bit. There's a little bit of, the refugees are, Putin is public enemy #1 by far. And I think there is an appreciation for what we're doing in the West. There's a little bit of a frustration that we're not doing more. So I wouldn't push it much more than that. I think people, honestly, the psyche is on, what am I going to do the next minute of my life, and not the bigger picture. I don't know that I've seen this sort of mental anguish the way I'm seeing it now. They were such shock for them that in a span of what for them seems like seconds, their lives has been torn asunder. We met with people who had to leave or had their homes destroyed, who left with no passport, no government documents, credit cards have been locked because of what's going on, their inability to communicate. They're focused on day-to-day survival. And the thing that I have heard a lot from the refugees is sort of thank God for Israel. And I kind of add, it's also very odd to be in Poland and to hear that it's good to be Jewish in Poland. There's a little bit of bittersweet irony in that, but that's been noted by a lot of people because the Jewish community, thanks to Israel's part and to the American Jewish community's part, has made it a lot easier in that sense for those who are seeking Jewish assistance. Now, we're not treating only Jews. One of the stories we heard at the JDC Center, the woman was clearly wearing a big cross, and she was extremely grateful for being able to have this opportunity. And her husband's left behind, and she's distraught, and that's what she's thinking about. So,
Jason, maybe you can give a little bit of background about our relationship with Jaffe and JDC and JFNA. Andrea was kind enough to put up that
that's 10 million, I see.
JFNA has already raised almost 40 million and released already almost 10 million. But I think a lot of people may not understand our relationship with Jaffe and JDC and the acronyms and things like that.
So the Jewish Federation of Northern New Jersey is one of 145, 47, whatever the exact number is, federations that make up the Jewish Federations of North America, which is the group that I came with. That's that group. Historically, as a system, as a collective, we have all funded two major overseas partners to conduct our work. The Jewish Agency for Israel, which before the State of Israel was established and was the de facto government of the Jewish people worldwide, was called the Jewish Agency for Palestine. Their main function in the world today, to simplify it, is Aliyah and Klita, or immigration and absorption to Israel, and Jewish Zionist education. So they run all of the Jewish day schools outside of North America. They run a lot of the Jewish camps, any of those programs like Birthright and things to bring kids who are not North American to Israel. The other side of the equation is also a historic organization called the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, also known as JDC. JDC started out of the rise of anti-Semitism stemming in Europe and right before the war, and their whole job was basically under the rubric, and to keep it simple, again, rescue, renewal, and relief. They go into communities and they help them with whatever assistance is needed at the time, and they try to make those communities sustainable. So in this case, it would be food, medicine, case management, counseling, anything related to mental health and things like that. The hope is that at some point this comes to an end, and JDC, for example, is going to be able to help communities plan for the rebuild, because people will go back to the Ukraine. The funding paradigm has always been that all of the federations, including our own, send a huge pot of money up to New York, to JFNA, the Jewish Federations of North America, and that pot gets divided 75% for the Jewish Agency or Jaffe and 25% for the JDC.
Jason, did you get a sense that there was sense on anti-Semitism in Poland, or?
Right now, no one's talking about any anti-Semitism in Poland. I mean, there is a little bit of talk that the government here, which is defined as a nationalist government, might get a little fed up with being the refugee depot, so to speak. But right now, there's a pretty strong support of the Jewish community, and there's a good relationship for the most part, other than the spats you read in the paper, between Poland and Israel.
All right, I think it's 5:30, so I'm going to ask, we're going to wrap it up. And the last thing, Jason, can you share with everybody maybe a reflection from how you are from as a person and as a Jewish community leader as to how this whole experience has impacted you? Should I have given you that question in advance?
Look, I'll lay it out there. How many people are on this call? We're going to hear this 142, which is amazing. It's very hard for me coming to Warsaw. It's difficult. The stories that I heard are impactful. I grew up, my mother was born in a displaced person camp in Berlin. My parents, my grandparents, my grandmother left Warsaw in the middle of the night in 1940, I believe it was, without saying goodbye to her father. And it's hard. I've never heard great stories. And, when I come to Germany and I come to Poland and Warsaw, and it's a modern city, and there's really, if you've been here, there's not much left. You go to the quote Jewish ghetto, and it's all buildings from the 50s and 60s, and now from the last 5-6 years. And it's hard. And I walked to the train station platform, which was 2 blocks outside the ghetto. And it has a mental impact, because I'm thinking to myself, these people are coming across the border to come here, and I'm reconciling the emotional upbringing that I had with regard to it with the reality that it might have been the iceberg or nuclear bomb at the time then, but now it's the lifeboat. And the mental transition in that is remarkable. I mean, there were plenty of times where I was smiling and laughing to see like a refugee kid act like a normal kid. You wouldn't know. This girl today was talking about her cat. I wish I had filmed her. I didn't know what was coming, but she was hysterical, and she was charming and witty and beautiful, and she's 11 years old, and it's like she has her whole future out of her. And then a part of me is like, oh, her poor mother, and I know what's going on. And so my mental balance is always between this optimism about what's going on, balancing the past, and of course, concern about what's next if Putin turns up the heat, which he hopefully won't. I know that was the last question, but I did want to answer this question about why is Israel not coming out against Russia, because it's a common theme. I don't know if anyone was on the call today. Today was the Herb Kinnelon call, Zoom. So I'm assuming he touched on this, but I'll be brief. Israel is in a real pickle, right? They're one of the few countries on the planet that has decent relationships with both countries, or at least it did. Russia is camped up on the north. Our sister city in Israel is Nahariya. It's 6 kilometers from the border. The hospital there has an old Katyusha rocket in the ophthalmology department that hit during the war. And Russia controls Syria, and Russia controls Syrian armed, airspace. And they have to deal with Russia on the border. And so they're very sensitive and careful as to how they criticize it, because if Russia were to cut off the airspace and allow arms flow into Syria, the entire part of Israel, really everything up from the Negev, is in Deadeye's range of what can come its way. So they have to balance that all out with what's going on in the Ukraine now. So behind the scenes, the Israeli government is extremely, extremely supportive of the Ukraine. And the other thing that was discussed today, yes, and Nancy, I see the other point. So, but they're balancing it. You can't take homage with the way Israel is really acting, because they are bringing in the refugees, they're doing what they can, and they're protecting their own interests at the same time. I actually just lost track. Oh, there's almost 500,000 Jews living in Russia, and they've gotten lost in this because they're not displaced, but they're a little bit on edge about what's going on as well. And you have to bear in mind that if you live in St. Petersburg and Moscow right now, and you're not Jewish, Putin has a stranglehold on you, or at least that's what the reports are saying. So the Jewish community in Russia is in a very fragile spot as well. And you should always bear in mind that those people are trying to stay out of harm's way or be the focus here. And you run the risk of those Jews having greater problems depending on what happens with other Jews worldwide.
All right, Jason. Well, thank you very much. We want to thank everybody for attending tonight and being so flexible with the time. Jason, sleep well, have a safe trip home tomorrow. And for everybody, we will continue to share all the on things that we hear about what's happening in the Poland and Ukraine. And if you haven't made a donation and you're inclined to do so, it's jfnj.org/Ukraine. And thank you all again and have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.